First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this beautiful conference, especially Gallup, of course, also for your kind hospitality. We started excellently, I think, so I hope to be able to be up to that as well. I will be, I think, the only one who will actually talk about the Anthropocene. Most people talked about biomimicry. I will say a little about that, but I will explicitly focus on the Anthropocene. So it will not be about biology and technology, but about another element of what is called the grown. It's the element of ecology. It's also grown in a way. So it will be about the relationship between technology and ecology. I changed my title a little, Eco-Neurotechnics, 3 beautiful Greek words. Heidegger would call them Grundworte. And I will try to show how they, I think they will become more and more intermingled. So first of all, the first of all, the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a new term that was introduced in around 2000 by a Dutch atmospheric chemist, Paul Crutzen, on a conference, on a UN conference, on the Holocene. In which he stood up, he said, no, we are not living anymore in the Holocene, but in the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene is actually the idea that the human has become the greatest geological and biospheric and climatological factor. So a factor that trumps all the other natural factors. And this NASA picture illustrates this influence of the human on the Earth very well, of course. So that's the idea of the Anthropocene. We have become a planetary force, greater than all the other planetary forces. Some also call it the Technocene. I think that's a better term because it's not just the anthropos, but it's the anthropos as a technical being in combination with its technology that creates this new geological era. Some, the Marxists, and I'm actually in favor for this one, call it the Capitalocene, because it's not the anthropos, it's not the human beings that live in the forests of the Amazon. No, it's actually the capitalist, capital as a force that creates all the mess, so to speak. And an important representative of this theory is Jason Moore, of course, the book The Anthropocene or Capitalocene, which I very much recommend. Now, this is a picture of all the, of course it's also photoshopped, because you cannot see them on this level. But these are all the satellites that go around the Earth and that enable the fact that we can communicate with the speed of light globally everywhere. And this is what is called by Vladimir Vernadsky and some others, Teilhard de Chardin for instance, the techno-noosphere. And this is a good illustration of what Heidegger in the 50s called the Gestell, right? Well, however, in the 50s there were still no satellites. The first satellite that was launched was in 1957, the Sputnik. But it's not just the technosphere, but the biosphere has also become more and more a biosphere, totally dominated by capitalism, by commercialism, by consumerism, etc., etc. Now, what is the Anthropocene? If you Google the term Anthropocene, you will mostly come up with these kinds of pictures. It's mostly about the human being consuming the Earth, destroying the Earth, destroying, in fact, its own life support system. And I go very fast to these illustrations because you all know what I mean. It's global warming, it's the most important characteristic. We are in the midst of a 6th mass extinction. Many species are dying out at the moment at an increasing pace. There is the phenomenon of peak oil. Our energetic resources run out. Supposedly we reached peak oil at 2008 with the economic crisis, and we still have no energetic alternative, of course. Anthropocenologues divide the Anthropocene, it's a consensus view at the moment, in 3 phases. The first phase is the Industrial Revolution, when we started to use thermodynamic engines, first of all the steam engine, of course, and as you see here, we started to pollute the atmosphere mostly with carbon dioxide. And now, at the moment, of course, methane will also become a much more polluted, a much more dangerous atmospheric element. Then, the great acceleration after 1945, after the Second World War. Please go to the internet and look to this picture. It's all exponentially growing. It's all in a way, heading towards the big collapse. It's the collapse, in a way, of the technical system with the ecological system, with the Earth system. Phase 3, which according to anthropocenologues should have started in 2015, is the phase of taking care of the Earth, taking the responsibility that we in fact already have, assuming it in a way, because we are responsible for the future of the Earth, whether we like it or not, willy-nilly, so to speak. It might be a hubristic idea to do that, but that's at least what anthropocenologues recommend doing. Now, what does this taking care mean? There are many so-called techno-fix solutions, geoengineering, eco-engineering, green capitalism, etc. As I said, these are mostly techno-fixes and a continuation in a way of business as usual. It's mostly capitalists and capitalist entrepreneurs, of course, that propose these kinds of solutions. We can also think of alternative energies, of renewables, etc. And of course, these are all important. Economic and social solutions, degrowth, steady state economies, permaculture, deindustrialization or counter-industrialization. These are all important, but I want to focus on cognitive and noetic and cultural solutions. And my focus will be here on the necessity of a kind of jump, maybe even a quantum jump, which is needed in our global ecological awareness, consciousness, conscience also, know-how, cognitive capacity, intelligence and wisdom, or what could be called eco-sophy, not ecology, but eco-sophy. And instead of opposing the Earth, what we have mostly done with our industrial technology until now, we should start to compose with it. And this, of course, requires a new way of thinking, a new way of imagining, first of all, and also a new way of acting. According to Peter Sloterdijk, in his wonderful trilogy Spheres, which the last volume was translated only recently, we are living now, or pre-living now, in what he calls being in the world 2.0, in der Weltsein 2.0, or you could also call it Biosphere 2.0, and Biosphere is actually the name of this structure in Arizona, in which they tried to recreate technologically all the life support conditions that support human life. This is the International Space Station, of course. And according to Sloterdijk, these things, in a way, point towards our future. Because if the biosphere, if we ruin the biosphere, we're in the business of doing that, maybe in the future we have to recreate it ourselves. So we become, in a way, astronauts, we become space travelers. So the most important practical anthropology of the future is space travel, manned space travel. Because, as he writes in Foams, the third volume of Spheres, he says, as yet, the knowledge of coexistence under conditions of the external, that's außen, think of space, this unlivable cold darkness in which our planet somehow exists, in its orbital position, still appears to be far removed from traditional life worlds. Yet, he says, its re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere will not be long in coming. And so, air conditioning will be our future, so to speak. And what the Anthropocene amounts to, and what is really uncanny, ungeheuer, massively ungeheuer about it, is that it turns the relationship between the carrying and the carried. The Earth is that which carries us, and only its carrying capacity is becoming less and less obvious. And the carried, we are the carried, the Earth carries us, this becomes overturned. And it's an overturn between the implicit and the explicit, or between life and forms. And that's what he calls environmental inversion. And in space travel, this environmental inversion has always already been a technical problem, an engineering problem, right? So, now what is the Anthropocene? You could understand it as a kind of ontological earthquake, or maybe also an ontic earthquake. As Isabel Stengers writes, what happens is that what we externalized until now, the so-called externalities, re-enter the interior of our culture. Or it's a retroaction or intrusion of what she, like Bruno Latour, calls Gaia. Gaia as a forgotten yet ultimate figure of transcendence, which we now rediscover. And Bruno Latour recently talked about Gaia as an object that we have to face, an object that is assuming agency in a way. And it's an agency which we have forever to be reckoned with. We cannot count on it. We have to take it into account. So the anthropos, the human being, as a technical being, the anthropotechnos, you could say, becomes a telluric force, an earth force. And the global technical system of enframing, what Heidegger called the Gestell, is disrupting what we now call the earth system. So it's a discovery of, and this, because of all these feedback effects of the earth upon our system in a way, we discover what Timothy Morton, an American eco-philosopher, calls the ecological thought, which is actually simply the idea of the interconnectedness of everything. The Anthropocene is not, definitely not the triumphant age of man. It's rather the opposite. At the height of our powers to destroy the earth, we discover that we are ultimately impotent. It's rather the dawning, I would say, of the ultimate impotence of what Dominique Chanico calls man's technological hyperpower, hyperpuissance, and the failure of modernity's project to become maître et possesseur de la nature, Descartes. We discover that we are not running the show, we are only ruining the show. We are only ruining the show. And I would say this is the discovery of what the Greeks called hubris. It's hubris and nemesis 2.0. Maybe it's our ultimate narcissistic offense, in a way, that we are just elements of the Earth's biosphere and have to behave according to that in the future. So we discover ourselves as existing in or upon a fragile, spontaneous life support system, the biosphere, and which we are totally dependent on it. We are in the process of destroying it, and until now we did it in blissful ignorance in a way. But we start, because we see what's happening, we start to learn more and more about it. Yet, and this is the really unprecedented anthropological mutation, is that from now on, this can never be considered as a given anymore. So, again, Sloterdijk, very much inspired by Sloterdijk, he calls it the ultimate end of our cozy enclosure in naivety. And the naive dependence and trust on the earth as something that is always there. According to Morton, the Anthropocene is the age of hyper-objects. Hyper-object, for instance, is global warming. It's so big, right? It's in the future, it's in the past, it's in what they call deep time. It's not something that we can imagine as the phenomenological objects of yore. They are hyper objects, objects maybe. And also the Anthropocene marks what Morton calls the end of the world. And what we always in phenomenology thought of as being the Lebenswelt, as the ultimate base in a way, appears to be, and Sloterdijk calls it, appears to be ultimately life world implantates in and outside, in the biosphere. And so when the charm of this life world is dispelled, we found ourselves, writes Morton, in the emergency room of ecological coexistence. And not only are we waking up inside a gigantic object, like finding ourselves in a womb, but it's a toxic womb, and we are also responsible for this toxicity. And according to a title by in a well-known book by Naomi Klein, this changes everything. And I would say the proportions of today's crisis are far beyond biblical. This is an unprecedented anthropological crisis. Again, Sloterdijk, the coining of the term Anthropocene inevitably obeys an apocalyptic logic. It indicates the end of any peace of mind in the cosmos, on which historical forms of human being in the world rested. And all our wisdom traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, whatever, even the Heideggerian releasement, is based on the fact that this earth will always be there, that we can rely on that. And if we subject ourselves to it, everything will become all right. But that's over. That die 11 jaren daar niet hingaben start, according to Sloterdijk. So it's an anthropological crisis, but also an anthropotechnological crisis. That the Anthropocene poses the ultimate test for humanity. to become finally really mature and assume responsibility for its planetary oikos. But of course the question is, are we having the responsibility to be such responsible beings? The Earth itself is at stake, right? It cannot be taken for granted anymore. This is the key message in a way, and relied upon as a robust backdrop and generous resource fund. It instead should become the central object of cultural care and concern. That's this overturning. So we have to take care of our own conditions of possibility. So human culture needs to include the biosphere, taking care of the Earth system, but this presupposes the restoration of culture into a system of care that does not oppose nature, but that, as I already said, composes with the Earth. But today's biosphere is not only disrupted by the technical system, by the Gestalt, but it's also enriched with it, right? With what is called the technosphere, the whole technical system, and the noosphere, the no-technosphere. And with a term of Stiegler, we could say that we should consider this as a pharmacon. It's both in a way toxic. It's both that which destroys, but it can always become that which heals, that which detoxifies. And as such, it should be approached in the future. But the question, of course, how to re-articulate these two anthropospheres with the biosphere, how to make them more attentive, responsive to the biosphere. Now, for Stiegler, the Anthropocene, what is most essential to it, is the coming to light of what he calls the massively toxic, and that is to say, anthropic character of contemporary hyper-capitalist or hyper-capitalist or industrial organology. And this is an important term. Human beings are organological beings. They only exist in relation to social systems, social organizations, and technical organs. Right? The human is an organological being, not an organic being, but an organological being, totally dependent on both social organizations and technical organs. More crucial even, the Anthropocene exposes our organological condition, in more simple terms, our technical condition as such, right? And thus it calls for an overcoming of the current toxic configuration, that which Heidegger analyzed in the 50s as the Gestalt. So the problem posed by the Anthropocene is how to overcome it and go to something else. And that means in practice how to transform our current consumerist, exploitative, toxic, anthropic organological configuration, the one that we inherited from the 19th and the 20th century, into an elevatory, caring, curative, neganthropic one, like life is a neganthropic force, and an entrance into what Stiegler calls the neganthropocene, or the neganthropocene, because the Anthropocene is, in a way, the Anthropocene. So this transformation is predicated on the pharmacological nature of all technical organs. So they are pharmaca, they are both healing and toxic. Our distress, or what Heidegger would call the node des science, is the need to transform the global technical milieu from a system supporting anthropic capitalism or consumerism into one that is supporting neganthropic caretaking of the earth, which would be an ecological or ecosophic turn. The primacy, again, in this ecological turn must be given, I think, to the cognitive and the noetic, and to an elevation of global intelligence, to a leap in intelligence really, as it is taking shape through the global network of digital media that make up the current psycho and no-technical milieu, or to use a term by Gregory Bateson, the current ecology of mind. Important that all human intelligence and all human attention, all human thinking is always already constituted, conditioned and shaped by media, and today predominantly of course by digital media, digital network technologies. What we need to confront the Anthropocene, how much time do I have? Enough. Okay. We need new attentional forms, new global horizons of attention new intelligence, new capacities of projecting, collectively projecting ourselves to overcome the global attention deficit disorder that capitalism has induced in us, glued to our screens as we are all the time. We should transform the anthropic, again, the ecocidal and mutually destructive cycle of speculative finance and careless consumerism into a more sensitive, careful, and more responsible engagement with the earth or with the biosphere. But anthropocenically, so to speak, the so-called noosphere, I would say, is still largely an ignosphere at the moment, or at least an ignorosphere. Well, the biosphere appears still predominantly as a biosphere and is in the process of becoming a thanatosphere, exactly the opposite of the biosphere. So we need a collective and ecological shift in thinking about cognitive enhancement and about cognitive enhancement technologies. Instead of the market adaptive, I think, individual enhancement transhumanist style, there is a need to invent collaborative and eco-centered digital network technologies or tools that are more connective, adaptive, and responsive to biospheric systems. And digital networks, digital technologies have an enormous ecological potential and could evolve into a new global sensorium, so to speak, as well as an effective global organon, an instrument for an earth-tending humanity. So we should use big data for big problems and not for the big industry, so to speak. The internet and the emerging Internet of Things need to become, and this is a term from Pieter Sloterdijk, well, this is not a term from Sloterdijk, he talks about homeotechnics, but it's in a way almost the same as biomimicry. It's cooperating with the modi operandi of nature, becoming homeotelic with the age-old earthly web of life that sustains the biosphere, or so to speak, a homeotechnosphere, which supposedly is more neganthropic than the one we've inherited from industrialism. So we should not think about cognitive enhancement like the transhumanists as a kind of personal adaptation to our competitive market society, but collectively as collective intelligence elevation and effective maturation, becoming more mature instead of more infantile. So this is more a critique, or not a critique, but an addition to Stiegler. We need to develop an eco-organology, a more homeotechnological fusion between the no-technosphere and the biosphere, which could develop in the future into a new eco-organological no-organism, what is sometimes called the global brain, which could open up, to talk again in Heideggerian, a new clearing, a new Lichtung, a new technical clearing. So big data, algorithmic governance, crowdsourcing, social networking, etc., nowadays mostly serving capital, could all take this neganthropic ecotherapeutic turn. The networks of digital biosensors, for instance, and biorobots could integrate themselves more and more in the ecological webs of the earth and help understand and maybe also repair and support the ecological and climatological processes of the earth. Or a global web of such homeotechnologies, which could be biomimetic technologies, of course. They're very similar. They could cross-connect information about, for instance, social, psychological, and economic processes with that of the ecological and physical processes of the earth. Digital network technologies could become means of reinserting and reweaving human consciousness into the long-term life cycles and ecological cycles of the Earth system. But the question, of course, are we up to this challenge? No, of course not. We are not up to this challenge. This is too big. This is really much too big. It's no human civilization that can now manage to do that. It's really much too horrible, much too traumatic, much too big for us. However, in the anthropology of Sloterdijk, I think the main message in Sloterdijk's anthropology is that the human being is that animal which is always, it's not an animal of course, but it's a kind of an animal that can learn from its experiences. It's an animal that is always confronted with problems that are far too big for it, but that somehow, until now at least, has always overcome them and then grow strong. This kind of Nietzschean a Nietzschean insight, of course. So I want to stop with 3 quotes by Sloterdijk. And he says in one of his books, "What is the human being if not an animal of which too much is demanded?" And the Anthropocene, finding a solution of it is really too much. Whoever has not been seized by the oversized, by das Übergroße, does not belong to the species of Homo sapiens. And this is the most beautiful quote by Sloterdijk, I would say. The true realism of the species consists in not expecting less from its intelligence than what is demanded from it. And this could be, of course, a definition of the Homo sapiens according to Sloterdijk. Okay, I want to thank you very much for your attention.